Hello everyone, thanks for clicking on the video. Welcome to 4 Great Gaming. In these segments, I'll be taking a look at game mechanics and features. For this first entry into the series, I wanted to try to do something kind of special. I wanted to take a look at one of my favorite class archetypes in gaming and give my opinion about what I think the overall class should look like in the context of a certain game. The archetype I'm talking about would be the Summoner in ARPGs. My first exposure to the Summoner archetype was in Diablo 2, the Necromancer. Playing the Necromancer in Diablo 2 LOD days was one hell of an interesting experience for me when I was young. It quickly became my favorite archetype, and more so, Necromancer became my favorite class identity. Since those days, quite a lot of ARPGs have been developed, and the Summoner archetype, Necromancer or not, has been iterated upon in various different ways. However, I still have not seen an ARPG implement the class in a way that I find to be completely fulfilling in terms of the class fantasy. Diablo 2 Summoner Necromancer was maybe the first of its kind, but also quite passive. You had your army, and generally you just casted curses and let the army go to work. It was fun, but it did feel quite limiting. I found Zoomancer to be relatively the same in Path of Exile. I haven't had the opportunity to really sit down and play Last Epoch, but I can see some very interesting concepts here, with giving your minions attack and move orders, along with some skills in the skill tree changing what your minions are. Interestingly enough, I found I really enjoyed the Summoner in Warhammer 40,000 Martyr, the Prophecies expansion. It allowed you to build an army with a custom loadout, and you could actually equip the army with different weapons and gear. However, for me, being a Summoner Necromancer, the fantasy means commanding an army. I wanted to try to craft a design of the Diablo 4 Necromancer that, as the playstyle, commands an army of the undead. How exactly could I approach this? Therefore, my main limitation is to follow what I perceive to be 3 of the key Diablo 4 game design philosophies. The first one, a limited skill bar. The second one, skills are mainly changed or upgraded through gear as opposed to in the skill tree. And finally, active play is encouraged, no passive buttons. I feel as though Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 both share this philosophy. In the classes I have played in Diablo 4, the builds I put together all had me using each button. There are no passive skills or buttons that I rarely push. Every skill works in cohesion to fill the build out. In short, we have buttons and we need to push them. So this brings us to a Summoner Necromancer that commands the army of the undead with a lot of active abilities. Let's see what I can come up with. But before getting into the nitty-gritty, let me go ahead and say that this design is purely based on a mechanical approach. That is, I have no intention of balancing this with exact numbers. I won't touch the skill tree, even though I will be adding some skills here and there, and I won't touch the Paragon tree. I'm going to delve into how I think the Necromancer Summoner mechanically could be redesigned to have a more commander of an undead army feel. Specifically, I'll be taking a look at minion identity, skills on the skill bar, and legendary aspects or uniques. Let's start with a redesign of the minion identities. As is, we have skeletal warriors, skeletal mages, and a golem. Each of these is giving a separate class, one of 3, from the Book of the Dead. I do not think these roles are currently well defined. I want to make each of these into a specific role for the army. For skeletal warriors, first we have skirmishers. These would be low durability, high attack speed, high crit chance, high crit damage. These will provide ideally high single target DPS for your army. Next we have defenders. High durability, attacks will overpower at a reduced percentage. These are tanky and provide crowd control for your army. And finally, reapers. Medium durability, high AoE capability. These are a middle ground and will provide AoE clearing for your army. Next up, we have mages. Skeletal mages, first shadow mages, low durability, shadow damage with a focus on damage over time. Long range DPS that, again, focus on damage over time. Bone mages, low durability, physical damage, control. Long range DPS that focus on physical damage and crowd control. Frost mages, low durability, ice damage, control. Medium range DPS that focus on ice damage and crowd control. And finally, the golems. For the bone golem, this golem would focus on crowd control. The blood golem would focus on support, and the iron golem would focus on damage. Now let's take a look at how I can redesign the skills with these new minion identities in mind. Of course, this is talking about a dream build per se, and each of these skills would end up being used. For left click, skeletal priest or skeletal acolyte. A skeletal priest, skeletal acolyte is summoned to support the necromancer. Passively, the priest acolyte will attack by channeling decompose. Actively, the Skeletal Priest or Acolyte will channel Decompose on the target. This skill replaces Decompose as our left click. The Priest or Acolyte is mostly flavor, perhaps even a Necromancer trainee. I wanted this to also feel, even as a generator, that we are giving commands. The idea here is to have another minion that helps create corpses for you. This skill could function exactly the same as Decompose, but you wouldn't be forced to channel it yourself because you'll be giving the orders to your army with our other skills. Right click would be a flex slot. Interestingly enough, I think the right click could serve as a flex slot. I imagine most would go with a curse here, but a spender could be interesting as well. I think a flex slot is rather important to give each build a bit of variety. Okay, for our 1, we have Legion Command / Legion Bastion. If clicking on an enemy gives the order to all of your minions to attack that enemy. If clicking on a corpse, summons a Skeletal Priest to heal and buff all of your minions for X amount of seconds. Firstly, this is going to demonstrate a new mechanic going forward. That is, clicking this ability on a corpse has a different effect as opposed to clicking on an enemy. For our class identity, I wanted to give us the main order of a summoner to attack an enemy. This button replaces basically the summon skeleton skill. The priest is still here, exactly the same as the priest in that skill. However, the skill now also serves another purpose, consuming the corpses to buff our army, and the other purpose being have our army accept our orders to attack a specific target. Number 2, summon Skeletal Warrior. If clicking on an enemy, we'll command Skeletal Warriors to perform their special attack. If clicking on a corpse, we'll raise 1 Skeletal Warrior. For special attacks, each class of Skeletal Warrior would have a different one. The Skirmishers unleash a Precision Strike, causing a guaranteed critical hit with increased critical strike damage. The Defenders raise their shields and taunt nearby enemies. The Defenders gain increased block chance and thorns for X amount of seconds. The Reapers arc their scythe in a large cone in front of them, dealing heavy damage to all targets in range. Now, this is our first specific order ability. Would these cost essences or have a cooldown? That's a good question. And that would be up for the balance team, right? Regardless, this is our order for our warriors. The abilities they have each help reflect their identity that I previously mentioned. Next, for our 3, we would have Summon Skeletal Mage. If clicking on an enemy, we'll command the Skeletal Mages to perform their special attack. If clicking on a corpse, we'll raise 1 Skeletal Mage. For special attacks, Shadow Mages. The Shadow Mages unleash a powerful shadow damage over time effect that can chain to nearby targets. Bone Mages. The Bone Mages raise a torrent of bone from beneath the ground, stunning any enemies caught in range. And for Frost Mages, the mages cast a Frost Nova, slowing any enemies caught in range. Our next ability order, and this one is for the mages. Same as the warriors, each mage has an ability to help flesh out their identity. 4, Command Golem. Commands your golem to use their special attack. Bone Golem is actually unchanged from what is currently in the game. The Blood Golem reaches out with its flesh tendrils and attaches to nearby enemies. For each enemy it is attached to, its damage will increase. While attached, its hits will heal nearby allies in a small area. The Iron Golem unleashes a large shockwave in front of it, causing high damage. As it stands, the Golem skill is, well, pretty good already. It matches the identity of giving a command to the Golem. However, Iron Golem is a bit too good in its current stage, providing both damage and crowd control on a small cooldown. I moved the crowd control identity to the Bone Golem while focusing on the Iron Golem's identity of being the DPS Golem. Blood Golem in its current state is a little bit boring, so I think the idea of it being a direct support to the army as a whole could be a bit more interesting. I think this fits nicely for my idea of a commanding necromancer. Almost every button is giving a command to the army. How well you can manage your resources of essence and corpses while giving commands is likely where the fun would come into play. However, I'd also like to take a look at what we have here and build on it even further with the aspect and unique system. Currently, I feel as though the aspects and uniques for Summoner Necromancer are severely underdeveloped. Ring of Mendel often doesn't even have you spec into minions at all, as it is you doing the damage through the skeletons. I would like the uniques and aspects to serve 2 roles, to improve and also to equip your army. A main inspiration for this is actually the Druid aspect that turns your wolves into werewolves. Why isn't there anything like that for Necromancer? I made some items to spice up the Necromancer's army in 2 ways. Number 1, a visual change to help give the upgraded unit feeling, like wolves turning into werewolves. And number 2, a permanent new ability given to each unit that they cast on their own to help flesh out their identity. Here are some ideas I came up with to help complement the changes to the skills I made. Bear in mind that the names of these items are all just flavor. If I get the lore wrong or something, sorry. Also, are these uniques or aspects? That would be up to the balance developers. Number 1, Rathma's Command. Your skeletal warriors deal X increased damage. Alternatively, your skeletal warriors scale with your stats by X. Your skeletal warriors become empowered. For skirmishers, skeletal skirmishers become skeletal berserkers. Skeletal berserkers dual-wield weapons and have increased attack speed. The skeletal berserkers will periodically become enraged and shriek, granting a buff to all nearby minions, greatly increasing their attack speed at the cost of health per attack. The idea here is to further flesh out their single target DPS capabilities. The attack speed and health per hit cost could encourage build variety in how you manage your army's overall health. Defenders. Skeletal defenders become skeletal champions. Skeletal champions are fully armored and use tower shields. The skeletal champions have massively increased armor and health and gain an improved overpower scaling threshold. Furthermore, the skeletal champions will occasionally shield charge, charging a target and stunning them. Here, I want defenders to be a viable army option in the endgame. Just being a tank won't do it, so how about allowing them to use the Necromancer's overpower in their own attacks? Furthermore, the shield charge would add to the crowd control capability. Reapers. Skeletal Reapers become Skeletal Wraiths. Skeletal Wraiths are floating skeleton warriors, wearing a cloak and wielding a scythe. The Skeletal Wraiths cleave with each attack and will occasionally pull all targets in a cone towards them. Here, we further improve our Reaper's AoE clearing function, a cone pull and a large cleave with each normal attack. This unique or aspect focuses on our warriors. Again, I took inspiration from that Druid aspect. Each class of Skeletal Warrior gains an equipment change, mostly visual, course, but also a new passive ability that they're able to use on their own. I think each improved version here helps flesh out the identities of each skeletal warrior class previously mentioned. Number 2, Rathma's Mind. Your skeletal mages deal X increased damage. Alternatively, your skeletal mages scale with your stats by X. Your skeletal mages become empowered. Shadow mages become shadow liches. Shadow liches wield a powerful shadow staff. Occasionally, the shadow liches will cast blight on their target. Bone mages become bone liches. Bone liches are floating skeletal mages wearing a cloak. Occasionally, the Bone Liches will cast Bone Spear. Frost mages become Frost Liches. Frost Liches wield a powerful wand and offhand. Occasionally, the Frost Liches will cast Blizzard. This aspect or unique would ideally replace the your skeletal mages can cast Blizzard aspect, and hopefully just make it more interesting overall. I really like the idea of the mages casting player abilities, and I tried to suit each one into their redesigned identities. Number 3, Rathma's Marrow. Your golem deals X increased damage. Alternatively, your golem scales your stats by X. Your golem becomes empowered. Bone Golem becomes Bone Abomination. The Bone Abomination wields a powerful bone pillar with a large cleaving attack range. The Bone Abomination occasionally stuns the targets hit by the Bone Pillar. The idea here is to reinforce and improve the Bone Golem's crowd control capability. Blood Golem becomes Blood Abomination. The Blood Abomination grows multiple limbs that assist with its attacks. Some limbs throw blood, granting the Blood Abomination a ranged attack. Occasionally, the Blood Abomination will vomit blood onto the floor, damaging any enemy standing in it while buffing any ally standing in it. Giving the golem a ranged attack could be an interesting twist as an upgrade. Furthermore, the blood vomit could buff the player and their army in a large variety of ways. Iron Golem becomes Iron Abomination. The Iron Abomination wields powerful iron claws. The Iron Abomination gains massively increased attack speed while occasionally doing a double strike, applying vulnerability to targets hit in a cone in front of it. I wanted to reinforce the identity of the Iron Golem being the strong damage choice. Currently, Iron Golem is mostly picked because it provides both vulnerability and crowd control on a small cooldown. I shifted that crowd control onto the Bone Golem while letting the Iron Golem keep its identity of damage and vulnerability application. Number 4, Rathma's Scale. Your skeletal mages are now skeletal warriors, or your skeletal warriors are now skeletal mages. Oops, all warriors. Or all mages. This item simply turns your mages into warriors, and vice versa. I think this item would be very interesting for those who want to focus on only using mages or only using warriors. Number 5, Rathma's Aid. Your skeletal mages are now skeletal priests. Skeletal priests heal and buff your other minions and party members periodically. I'm not sure exactly what they would do, but the idea mechanically is giving up damage from mages and converting that into utility. The priest could provide various buffs or auras, for example. Number 6, Bone Quiver. Your skeletal X, maybe warriors or mages, I'm not sure, are now skeletal archers. Again, Not too sure on the exact details on this one. I think turning warriors into archers and thus gaining full range could be interesting. Furthermore, going to the extreme route, the archers could all have their own minion class in the Book of the Dead, along with getting changes from the previously mentioned items. This is simply more ways to customize the army that you want to use. Looking on this design, I do think that, at least for me, this would be the ultimate summoner necromancer class in an ARPG. Necromancers in most ARPGs are pretty well done, but I honestly think that they lack the command part of the fantasy. Oftentimes it is just minions and the skills the necromancer would normally use. Why not have each skill be in order for the army itself? Anyway, these are some of my thoughts on how I would redesign the Summoner Necromancer to function mechanically within Diablo 4's philosophies. Thanks a ton if you watched the video. Have any thoughts? What's the ultimate Summoner Necromancer for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd like to see them. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks.